Hello beautiful fish lovers, and welcome to a new episode of Puff Daddy Reef. Thanks for joining me today. We have just hit 3,000 subscribers. If you're not one of them, hit that bell below and hit the subscribe button, of course, and you can join the Coral crew. Well, I promised that after 3,000 subscribers I would give something away, usually some old equipment from my old tanks, and today I'll be announcing the details to enter to win the Aqua Controller Junior by Neptune Systems. So the rest of the details for how to enter to win this are at the end of the video. And keep in mind, it is a used piece of equipment. There's some quirks about it, but if you need something to set up a quarantine tank or a non-primary tank, that's great, or even your first tank, it should work pretty well. So let's jump into it. Today we are talking about pairing clownfish. Now, I'm primarily going to talk about two types of species that are the most common, or actually three. You have your Ocellaris clownfish, your Percula clownfish, and then your Maroon clownfish. These are the ones that I've had experience with pairing, so I'm going to share those experiences and also talk about one of my most recent pairing experiences. I would say clownfish are one of the best species to keep in a reef aquarium. They are extremely durable, especially Ocellaris clownfish. They're also very affordable. You can get captive bred specimens almost anywhere for, maybe $15 for an Ocellaris clownfish, but you can also get very unique specimens as well. The adaptability of these clownfish to aquarium life has led to a whole revolution of breeding these species to create new and unique patterns. So if you want to get something that just looks crazy, like an all-white clownfish or an all-orange clownfish, you can get that now. They have all sorts of combinations. Basically, any way that you can mix the color palette of clownfish, which are basically white, orange, brown, and black. Any way you can mix these colors, pretty much have come up with a clownfish that looks like that. Now, Ocellaris clownfish, I would say, would be definitely a great one to start with, but one that I really like is Maroon Clownfish. I particularly like Maroon Clownfish because they pair well with bubble tip anemones, which is one of the most popular and easy to keep anemones in the tank in aquariums. Now, one downside for Maroon Clownfish is they typically take up more space and they're often more aggressive than your Ocellaris or even Percula clownfish. But even with Maroon Clownfish, they're starting to come out with new colors and shapes too, if you're interested in that. And I think it's worth it because it's great to see a clownfish that just so easily hosts an anemone. That's not to say you can't get your Percula and Ocellaris clownfish to host anemones. A lot of them will end up hosting bubble tip anemones. Mine actually hosts my my hammer coral, and so you never know what they're going to host. Let's talk about pairing Ocellaris clownfish, because what is more beautiful in a reef tank than a clownfish hosting an anemone? That's just symbiosis. It's just absolutely gorgeous. This is why we have reef tanks. But even better than that is a clownfish pair, and even better than that is a clownfish pair hosting an anemone and breeding. And this is all very achievable in the hobby, and trying to achieve these things keeps things very, very exciting. So if you're looking to pair a Ocellaris clownfish, typically, like I said, it's really good to buy fish that are already paired. But if you're buying Ocellaris, typically the best way to do it is to buy two really young, really small fish and raise them together. Now, the reason why I say this is clownfish, basically when they're born sexless. So they're not really differentiated, they're not male or female, they're just kind of a sexless clownfish. They live in large groups, and over time, as they grow and mature, and depending on social and environmental factors, they will slowly convert to a male. After another period of time, it's possible that a male may convert to a female. But this is a one-way trip. You go from a sexless clownfish to a male to a female, but you can never go back. So during this process, when you pair clownfish, it's important that you pair, of course, a male with a female so they get along. in clownfish hierarchy, females are the dominant ones. And so if you're buying a pair of a very young, small Ocellaris sexless clownfish and grow them together, as they develop, they'll bicker back and forth, but then one will emerge more dominant. And so as they transition from sexless to male, the female, or the most dominant one, will transition to a female, and that will be the female one of the pair. And over the life of these clownfish, the female will generally be much bigger than the male, will dominate the male, and you'll see these displays of domination of the female and submission by the male, indicated by the female will basically take a bite or charge the male, and the male will do this like shaking movement to basically demonstrate that you win, I'm submitting to you, and you don't need to fight me because I'm not a female, you're the boss. And so this is a good sign when you're pairing your clownfish and want to see how they're doing. Now, maroon clownfish are a little bit different, and typically the suggestions that I have read online for pairing maroon clownfish is you want to get a large female established in your tank. The female should be 3 inches or greater, just pretty much well-developed large female. And then to that female, eventually you're going to introduce a very small male. Now, you want to make sure that this fish is less than 1 inch. So they're extremely small. There's no risk that they've differentiated into a female. It's much better if you get the small male that was still in kind of a breeding ball or a group of a bunch of other, not a breeding ball, but a hatchling, youngling ball, still in a group from a breeder where they had a whole bunch together, so you can be sure that it's not sexless. If it's a small one that's been apart for a while, it's possible that it could have started transitioning. A transition takes about a month once they're large enough to be mature enough to make that transition. So it's important to make sure that you have a either sexless or male maroon clownfish, and then you can introduce that to the female, but very slowly in a manner to protect it. And so that's what I attempted to do with Bling, my lightning maroon clownfish. So I have this, it's actually hiding back there, this lightning maroon clownfish. It's about 3 inches right now, and I was going to introduce her to Bling as you saw in my previous video. And what I did is I had this little box, and this is an acclimation box. It's really great. I enjoyed it a lot. I use it to acclimate fish, but I also use it to catch fish, as you can see in my previous video. And you put basically the fish inside. There's also a door that slides down. You close it. It's transparent. It's a little bit dirty right now. I need to scrub it off. And the maroon clownfish will basically look at the fish and check them out, make sure that, try to figure them out, right? And this will protect the smaller fish as the large female gets used to him, so she doesn't beat him up right away, see there's an invader. And typically what's been recommended is to do this for at least a couple days, maybe 3 days would be a minimum before you ever even introduce the young male to the large dominant female maroon clownfish. Now when you introduce these, you gotta be very careful. There will be some aggression, undoubtedly, and hopefully the young male will submit. And also there's some interesting submission moves that maroon clownfish do. Sometimes the males will dodge them and then come up and kiss the cheek of the female. It's very, very sweet. But you need to be very careful that the young male doesn't get beaten up too much. So you need habitat, maybe a safe zone, someplace in there where the young male can go to kind of recover. I've seen people basically create little cages, little boxes with little slots in it that the young male can go in and out of, but they might be too big for the female. That might be an option. Or if you have just plenty of habitat in your tank, that might be a good way to do it. So unfortunately, when I was trying this process with my fish, Bling, and my larger lightning maroon clownfish, I was using this acclimation box. And I had the acclimation box in the end of the tank, and it has this kind of flapper lid that's just kind of held down by gravity. But what happened is I turned everything off overnight, basically left it there, came up the next morning, and this flapper lid had kind of blown up. I should have found a way to secure it. I don't know if there's a way, but I need to definitely look into that if I ever try this again. This thing flew up and the fish basically escaped in the middle of the night and took a pretty heavy beating and did not make it. So this was a very tragic event, and I don't know if it's just because this fish was incompatible with the maroon, or if potentially the frostbite cloud also played a role. But it was unfortunate that my box wasn't secure, so I wasn't there to supervise that first interaction. So keep that in mind. It's always very high risk to pair maroon clownfish. If you can buy a pair, that would be great. But if you do it, make sure that you have a secure acclimation box and there's a way that you can rescue it very quickly and kind of supervise that interaction. Here's the problem with clownfish. They're very aggressive to anything that looks like a clownfish. And there's lots of ways to reduce aggression. And sometimes they just work out and sometimes they don't. What is so interesting in this tank is I have what's called I call them the odd couple. I basically have my lightning maroon clownfish and my frostbite clownfish. My lightning maroon clownfish I bought by himself because at the time lightning maroon clownfishes were really expensive. I paid $300 for that clownfish. Now you can get them for $30 from a local breeder online for like $70. Really, the price has dropped a lot because that's what breeding does. If people demand something, they make more. So I only got one. And then I also have my frostbite clownfish, and I actually bought that as a pair. So they're already paired. It was a great pair. But one night the dominant female jumped. So I tried to basically pair these fish. And they never really paired. But they tolerate each other. And that's fine. It's surprising, they get along just fine in this tank together. They do get in tussles from time to time, and the frostbite one always submits. It's smaller and weaker. However, they're not bonded. They don't like to spend time with each other. They always try to avoid each other, and that's okay. It's a very large tank. There's plenty of room for both of them. It may not work for all fish, but it works for these. If you saw my earlier video, Fish Fight, I thought that this tank was big enough that maybe I could get my other pair of clownfish. I have a pair of snowflake clownfish that you'll recognize from this channel. This was my very first pair of clownfish. And these fish, basically I introduced them all at the same time, and there was an instant fight. The maroon clownfish and the big female snowflake just tore at each other. And fortunately, I was supervising that interaction. I immediately took the snowflake clownfish and put them into the sump. So here's another lesson about clownfish. You always got to remember, it's basically going to be one pair per tank. It's always better to buy them as a pair, or in the case of Ocellaris clownfish, you can buy two at the same time when they're very young and pair them. Maroon clownfish, it's always going to be tricky to pair, so if you can buy ones that are actually already paired at the pet store, that's the best situation, but you can pair them. But in general, no more than 2 clownfish per tank. And as a clownfish lover and a clownfish addict, that was fine when I had 4 tanks. Every single tank would get 2 clownfish. But eventually I had to consolidate, and I actually ended up having to sell some of my clownfish, or trade them in at the fish store for some in-store credit and get some other fish. So just always be aware of that. Clownfish are very exciting when you're getting your first ones. Always try to get a pair, and always try to get ones that you know you're going to want and be excited about for a long time. So if you want one of those crazy colors, just go for it. So that's all I have for today in this video about clownfish. This was basically a video about my failure of pairing these clownfish, but also there is some success because we do have peace in this tank with this current couple of clownfish. If you have any questions, comments, or anything about clownfish, pairing clownfish, please leave a message below in the comments. And thank you very much for joining me today. So I wanted to let you know how to enter my contest before I leave this video. So basically, if you want to win this Aqua Controller Junior, basically how the contest is going to go is, well, let's look at it. Do you want to look at it? All right. So basically, this is Neptune Apex a long time ago. I think even before it connected to the internet. I actually don't know if it connects to the internet or not, but you don't need to. It basically has this controller here that you can control. There's some interesting quirks about it, but it basically monitors temperature and pH, which is very good. It's got one power brick, and it's one of the classic ones, so it doesn't have any USB ports. It just has these basically these little telephone jacks, and then it's got a power cable and of course a temperature probe. So if you want to win this, basically I'll just ask that you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell, leave a comment below, leave a like, and the comment that I ask that you leave is just let me know what your favorite reef aquarium fish is. I want to know which one's your favorite. Leave a comment, and then if you see anyone else that said the same one's your favorite, also, you know, like theirs, so maybe we can raise the favorite fish to the top, or I could just go through and count them. But that's it. Comment, like, subscribe, favorite aquarium fish, and then next week I will do the entry for this. So thank you very much for tuning in today on this episode of Puff Daddy Reef. Happy reefing and have a great time.